Babu never see so much of confusion in the country. That's coming down to the election. The people of Guyana in high tension. The government put out a voters list. Me, Babu Ramsa, say it's stupidness. Me searching the list, but all was in vain. Me can't find me and me family name. You know me can't find me Pauji, me Pauja. Me can't find me Aji and me Aja. Me can't find me Ma, me can't find me Pa. Me can't even find me Babu Ramsa. For when me run back the other day, me searching the list without no delay. But the Babu Ramsa, me not ashamed. We say the same thing happen again and again. No name on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. Babu Ramsa name not up on the list. But still me see some people looted and gone. Their name appear on the list for the election. Well, Babu Ramsa can understand. From first to the last, still listen confusion. That is why the opposition reject the first declaration. Although the president tell the nation he wants a transparent election. Now everything like it on a wire. Just say it's the fault of some computer. Me can't find me body, me CC. Me can't find me wife, neither me baby. Me can't find me daddy for the ram that ram look and neither Mr. Ibarat. Me turning the pages one to the next. This imagine how Babu feeling. Hurry, Bob. They can't find me to the no name on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. Babu Ramsa name not up on the list. But still me see some people look on God. Their name appear on the list for the election.
Grandma come out say she don't care say.
No name on the list. But coming down to the election, the people of Guyana in high tension. The government put out a voters list. Me, Babu Ramsa, say it's stupidness. Me searching the list, but all was in vain. Me can't find me and me family name. You know me can't find me Pauji, me Pauja. Me can't find me Aji and me Aja. Me can't find me Ma, me can't find me Pa. Me can't even find me Babu Ramsa. For when me run back the other day, me searching the list without no delay. But the Babu Ramsa, me not ashamed. We say the same thing happen again and again. No name on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. Babu Ramsa name not up on the list. But still me see some people looted and gone. Their name appear on the list for the election. Well, Babu Ramsa can understand. From first to the last, still listen confusion. That is why the opposition reject the first declaration. Although the president tell the nation he wants a transparent election. Now everything like it on a wire. Just say it's the fault of some computer. Me can't find me body, me CC. Me can't find me wife, neither me baby. Me can't find me daddy for the ram that ram look and neither Mr. Ibarat. Me turning the pages one to the next. This imagine how Babu feeling. Hurry, Bob. They can't find me to the no name on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. Babu Ramsa name not up on the list. But still me see some people look on God. Then him appear on the list for the election.
Grandma come out say she don't care.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Welcome to Politics 101 on a Thursday evening. No name on the list. Me Dulain not up on the list. Me Aji not up on the list. You all see why I like Calypso, you don't lie. One of the functions of music is to record events in real time. That was sung by the Mighty Rebel in 1993. Mashomani. Recording the PPP. Saying how the voters list need to be clean because you get dead people who voted on the list. Ajigo, she named the dep on the list. Aja named the dep on the list, and Betana dep on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. And they said no election without a clean voters list. No election without a clean voters list. That was 1992, sorry, not 1993. 1993 rebels sing Desi Orang. 1992 was when the PPP was kicking up a storm about the voters list. And they said no clean voters list, no election. The Calypsonian don't lie. The Calypsonian record in real time what was happening.
Me can't find me and me family name. You know me can't find me Pauji, me Pauja. Me can't find me Aji and me Aja. Me can't me ma, me can't find me pa. Me can't even find me Babu Ramsa. For when me run back the other day, me searching the list without no delay. But the Babu Ramsa me not ashamed. We say the same thing happen again and again. No name on the list. No name on the list. No name on the list. Babu Ramsa name not up on the list. But still me see some people looted and gone. Their name appear on the list for the election.
You got to love the Calypsonian. You got to love the Calypsonian. The Mighty Rebel there deck out like Babu and the PNC, the PPP way back then was saying this is the problem. And then since then we hear what Jack Dio said and we hear what Nandlal said. But as far back as 1991, 1992, they were saying the clean voters is now we saying. Now the other side saying clean voters, they say no. We have Vincent Alexander here tonight and we're going to be talking through because we cannot let up. We got them on this issue. No answer. They're trying. They who have been complaining for decades about this voters list now, we are saying once and for all, take care of the voters list, take care of voter impersonation. They're fighting tooth and nail. All of a sudden, the system works. You can stop the Caisonian. You can stop the Caisonian. The Caisonian don't lie.
Reject the first declaration. Follow the president, tell the nation he wants a transparent election. Now everything like it on a wire. Just say it's the fault of some computer. Me can't find me body, me CC. Me can't find me wife, neither me baby. Me can't find me daddy for the ram that I'm looking like the Mr. Sibarat. He turning the pages one to the next. Mr.
Vincent Alexander is here with us tonight. Vincent, you remember back then?
Oh, certainly. Certainly.
Hey,
I would go back further. David, I would go back further.
All right.
Because of the complaints they relate to 1968, 1973.
Yes.
How they had people, they found empty plots in London, and people were registered to vote in those empty plots. They have now passed a law again where you could have an empty plot, but once you give the address, you can be registered.
There you go. There you go. Vincent, I used to be on their side, meaning the WPA used to be in the opposition then with them. And we were saying clean voters list. At least be consistent. We were saying clean voters list then, and we saying clean voters list now. They were saying clean voters list then, and they turned them out now. That is a very important point you're making, because they say they go to London and they see goat and sheep, and 20 people vote in the election. And these are the people in 2022 who remove the residency. You know, all you have to do is present thing. You don't got to present where you live. And that was passed in 2022. 2022, right, Vincent?
2022, yes.
2022. All right, we're going to walk this thing through tonight. And there's a reason we're going to be repeating ourselves, but sometimes it's good to repeat yourself so that you can make your point. I saw a program 2 nights ago, last night, yes. Vincent was on with another commissioner, PPP commissioner. And the man...
It wasn't a commissioner, it was a parliamentarian.
Parliamentarian,
that it in.
Yeah, that it in. Confusing me with Gunraj. And instead of the man responding, Vincent walked with all the document, like a liar. And he gets his document there. And Vincent showing all, and he pushing the official document in front of them. And he got on the phone and he reading from some newspaper report and not dealing with the facts. Sisters and brothers, we are in the face of a government and a party that do not want free and fair elections. And we on this side of the aisle are insisting that there must be free and fair elections. And for there to be free and fair elections, we have singled out 3 things: a clean voters list, biometrics, and an impartial GCOM machinery. And we are saying we must do everything possible to reduce the possibility of the human factor intervening. The human factor will intervene anyway, but we have to be cognizant of that and reduce. Yes, Freddie was there sitting down like a little stupid boy, because this is a man saying his life has changed because of what happened in 2020. And Vincent did it and showing you, look, this is what happened in 2020. And he sit down there like a little moo. Sit down like a little moo. Hey, Vincent, I know you since in Workmanville. These are the people. They've spread a big lie. And that lie, because of their big voice, that lie has persisted for 4 years. That the real tampering of the election really happened on the other side that is charging people with tampering. No, at least Vincent Alexander is saying, look, Vincent gone fee papers there. do a review GCOM and let the review tell you who tamper, where tamper, how they tamper. And the review might well show that both sides tamper. Because the PPP saying that the PNC/APNU AFC tamper. Well, GCOM, if you are getting such a charge, why don't you do a review and to see where the tampering happened? They don't want to do the tampering, and who's blocking the review? The PPP. The PPP itself that said that the next site attempted to steal the election. Now they get a chance to prove in GCOM they are running away from it. This is the truth. And as an old spiritual man in the village, Mr. Nelson used to say, he says the gospel truth. Not gospel, he said gospel truth. Because you can't lie on facts. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome. You're joining us from inside of Guyana, good evening. In the wider Caribbean, good evening. In North America, good evening. In Europe, good night. And where I am, in Arizona, good afternoon. I know I have some young viewers. You know, the young people in my class come up to me after class today, a couple of them, said, Dr. Hines, you know you can make money. I said, tell me, I need some money bad. They said they already run through Politics 101. And I have 1.2 million. And they don't calculate how much money it can monetize. You can't stop these young people, eh? You just watch remote on them, but they get a brightness about them that we can't begin. They just recently found out that I do a podcast, and they take it on like now it's their class. And they're not only watching the content, they also could tell me how many viewers I have, where and how much money I can make. Before they left class today, they asked me, what is on tonight? I said, election. Vincent, let's start this conversation. There is a feasibility study that was done by the chief election officer, and that has been placed before the commissioners and the chair. My party, the WPA, said we would have preferred some outside agency, some independent agency to do the feasibility study. All right? Because we can't trust the chief election officer. However, he did this feasibility study. Tell us, what are the main points that are being made in the feasibility study?
Well, in the feasibility study, which I would prefer to refer to as a write-up rather than a feasibility study, he seeks to give some background as to why this came about, but more importantly, he sought to look at the pros and cons of the introduction of biometrics and to express concerns. So he speaks about the advantages, what good biometrics could do. And having spoken about the advantages, which he recognized would be, on one hand, that we would get good fingerprints if we do capture the fingerprints digitally. We'll get good fingerprints, and therefore we will have a situation where we have good prints for the purpose of cross-matching. And so the problem we confront in cross-matching will be eliminated. Where in instances there are bad prints, and therefore we can't do absolute 100% cross-match. He also referred the fact that beyond cross-matching, if we have good fingerprints, then we can do proper identification at the place of poll. But having identified those general benefits to the process, he then went on to identify what he considered to be the challenges to the process. For example, he said that In a place like Guyana, a challenge is power supply. That is one. He further said that there may be difficulties with people, kind of suggesting if somebody is like a cane cutter and uses a cutlass, his fingerprints may be distorted. And so that may be problematic. So that the fingerprint the person took last year might be different from this year because the person, nature of work can do some disfiguration of the fingerprints. He talked about the question of the Constitution being something that has to be addressed if we are to touch on this question of fingerprints. We can't just simply do it in GCOM. The Constitution has to be amended more or less to get that done. He talked about the possibility of disenfranchisement and using the court ruling and the Constitution that nobody should be disenfranchised. And therefore, if you are on the register and you turned up and per chance your fingerprint didn't match, since you're in the register, not to have you vote means you're disenfranchising an eligible voter. So you raise that question, a constitutional right to vote in the context of the ruling of the judge as well. He also raised the question of finances, cost, how costly it will be. He raised the question of the time frame in relation to elections in under a year's time. He raised that question as well. He raised the question of training of manpower, because this thing here will require manpower to operate it, and GCOM doesn't have people who have that knowledge presently, and therefore they'll have to be trained. And so that's an issue in relation to time as well, in view of elections within a year. And so there were a number of issues he raised. And I would suggest that given the issues he raised, and one were to take a probability based on the advantages and the disadvantages, he seemed to be coming down on the side that at minimum, this can be done for elections 2025. We are, however, still to discuss that document. And so it is, bear in mind the word probability. I didn't say that he said it can be done.
Right.
I'm saying, given what he has written, from the standpoint of probability, one on the face of the document could say, well, this guy is saying it can't be done in 2025. He's saying that, he also said that there are countries who have done it and have run into problems, so it is problematic.
Good. Vincent, we're going to go through this thing step by step, but I just want to make a general point, which I know that you're familiar with, and that is to say that we don't have time, and that time can be used not to have something as important as that. We go back to 1992, that election that we referenced there in the calypso by the Mighty Rebel, that after there was an all-party agreement which was brokered by President Jimmy Carter, there was a delay of 2 years, almost 2 years, in that election. And they went to Parliament and they passed the necessary legislation to allow for time for it to be done. So even if it can be done in time for the next election, I do not think that the opposition would disagree with going to Parliament and ask for an extension while these important amendments are made, adjustments are made. So I just want to throw that out there. But let's go to the meat of the matter. He raised the question of legislation. Speak to that issue. How legislation is a problem and how we can get around the business of legislation.
First of all, let me hone in on what you said.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to speak on behalf of the opposition on this matter of time. Suffice to say that in approaching this matter, we have to disaggregate the issues. We have to, in the first instance, in principle, agree whether we want biometrics, meaning capture of digital fingerprints, and identification by digital fingerprints at the place of pool. We have to decide in principle what we want. If we decide in principle, we then have to look at the modalities. Given all the pros and all the cons, how could we confront the cons in particular? How can we confront them? For example, if a con is electricity problem, then we could confront that simply by understanding that the gadget which does the fingerprint identification at the place of pool can have a power pack which could be used from the beginning or which can be there as a standby in case the GPL fails us. So in that way, you could discuss these matters and find ways in which you can overcome those problems. There are some issues which are not germane to GCOM itself. And so the issue of legislation, for example, if it is relevant, is not a GCOM issue. The issue of, I said legislation, the other issue of funding is not purely a GCOM issue. And therefore, we don't have to discuss those issues while we're determining the principle. We have to bear in mind those issues because those are issues, if we come to the point where we decide, yes, we want to go ahead, we have to raise with the relevant stakeholders. And may I hasten to say that one of the things the CEO also said was that a part of this process should be stakeholder consultations. Stakeholder consultation. And for me, that means consultations with the political parties, consultations with civil society, and consultations with the government, and probably the legislature, because it's the government that will deal with the issue of funding. It's the government, it's the legislature will deal with the issue of the laws. Civil society will bring to bear the interests of the people at large, and the political parties will bring to bear their independent and individual political interests. And you cannot finalize a decision unless all of that is thrown into the wash. But we have stages. GCOM stage, and then we go beyond GCOM with the external issues, factors, to see how what GCOM has decided can be accommodated. Now, on this question of the legislation, as I said, the process involves two things. Registration at the place of registration, doing digital fingerprints digitally. In my humble opinion, that does not require legislative intervention. If one looks at the National Registration Act, one would see the power to determine how registration is done, the process of registering, how it is done, is vested in GCOM. It's vested in GCOM. And also vested in GCOM is the power to make regulations where necessary. So my contention is that if we are talking in the first instance about the capture of fingerprints, anybody who tells you about legislation, that person is trying to throw something into the wash, which is an obstacle to the decision on that question. On the question of legislation in relation to fingerprints at the place of poll, I too do not view the fact that there's need for legislation in that regard, because I don't think the law specifies that what we do now is the only thing which can be done. That is to come with your ID card and so forth.
Right.
The law doesn't say that that is the only thing that can be done. And in fact, those things are largely done within the context of GCOM's regulations and GCOM's procedures. And therefore, I don't see a difficulty if you introduce a different procedure that you need to go to the Constitution to do that. Suffice to say that they're kind of arguing that the Constitution says, and the judge says, that you can't deny somebody from voting once in the list of the registrants, right? And so they say, well, you got to get some constitutional amendment if you have people turn up and you can deny them from voting. Suffice to say this, the present system, where we do use an ID card, notwithstanding what the judge ruled, to allow someone to vote, allows someone who does not have an ID card to use an affidavit of identity. Now, as I said earlier on, you have to decide in principle, then you have to get into the modalities. And so, to use that as a reason suggests that you're not prepared to get into the modalities. Mm-hmm. Because there's a possibility that in introducing identification by fingerprint at the place of poll, you would say, look, there is somebody who may be handicapped, somebody who may be differently abled, that person has lost a finger, may have lost a hand, and therefore you can't subject that person to the normal process of fingerprint identification. And in that instance, you may have a provision which says, well, that person can fulfill the requirement by signing affidavit of identity. The point that I'm making is the people who come with this absolutism are in fact throwing up red herrings in a process that can be fashioned to deal with all of the realities. And in doing that, I want to say this. People who will turn up with fingerprint problems, I cannot envisage them numerically exceeding the hundreds who turned up without ID cards. You can ostensibly lose your ID card. You don't lose your hand and disfigure your fingerprints to that magnitude. So that in any circumstance, I'm suggesting, even if you have to accommodate these peculiarities, that you will be bringing more fingerprints for identification to the system than you presently bring ID cards, given the number of people, which is on record, who have come forward with affidavits of identity rather than the original ID card. And for me, that in the last elections was a part of the red flag, which was raised. The number of people who came forward with affidavits of identity rather than ID cards. And this is not conjecture. This is fact. And I'd like to repeat to you, David, that I'm dealing with facts. I'm not dealing with some idealism and absolutism. I'm dealing with what has occurred and what is and what can be done in our circumstances. So that these questions of the legislature and the Constitution and all of that, to a large extent, I see them as red herrings. And on the question of time, that is not a matter that GCOM should start off discussing. We should agree in principle. When we agree in principle, Then we deal with the modality. Modality will tell us the time. We will then say to the people who are responsible for elections that we can deliver an election by a certain time under the normal arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a consensus of the nation, and given our view that we want to go ahead with biometrics, then we should be told whether that is acceptable to the stakeholders or whether we cannot go ahead, at least at this round, on the question as posed. And then that decision should be made. We should throw that in at the very, very inception. And so again, in the context of time, there is this argument that how long it can take to capture the fingerprints.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the argument that you're going to have to take everybody's fingerprint, and therefore they're saying no, it's a backdoor approach to a new list.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're saying. Again, they are jumping the gun. We could well decide two things. We could well decide that, given the circumstance of time, that we will introduce incrementally the question of capture of fingerprints digitally. So we don't have to hold up the election timetable, but that everybody, as of a certain date now who comes forward, we capture their fingerprints digitally, and we keep going forward over time doing that without hindering the election timetable. Similarly, we already have digital fingerprints, but they're flawed. They're flawed. And so they're not the best ones to use. But
how are they flawed?
All right. We have taken fingerprints manually. Those manual fingerprints are then digitized.
Mm-hmm.
So the extent to which the manual capture is flawed because of not properly capturing them, you position your hand properly in the pattern, so is the extent to which, even when we digitize those prints, the problems that originated when they were captured will be manifest when they're being used.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, they're flawed. But I'm saying this, that if we are committed to this process, we may well say, all right, though they're flawed, in this round of things, we will take the digitized fingerprints we have, because we have them digitized, notwithstanding the quality, and we will use that for this time, even as into future, we try to make sure we capture all the fingerprints over time in a manner, digital manner, and therefore eliminate the problem that you would have with the digital prints which we presently have, which were captured manually. So that I'm saying all of these issues can be confronted if we have a commitment in principle to using digital capture and using digital identification at the place of poll. So those who are coming up now with all of the obstacles are in fact demonstrating that they don't have a commitment, but they want to intellectually negate what is a real possibility, given the fact that there are things that can be done to accommodate what we want to do, even if it means we wouldn't be doing all that's ultimate at this time, but going through the incremental process into the future.
Vincent, let me ask you a layman's question, because on these matters, I think most of us are laymen and women. The court ruled during the 5-month period that GCOM could correct any problems it sees with the election, even during the election period, before an announcement is made of the results. In a sense, it has given GCOM pretty wide powers. would, and you probably will tell me that you have answered those questions, but sometimes you have to say things 2 times for really people to understand. Isn't something like biometric, doesn't it fall under that sweep of the court's ruling that GCOM needs to do everything to ensure free and fair elections?
Biometrics does not fly in the face of the court's ruling. I'll answer it that way.
Okay,
It
good.
does not fly in the face of the court's ruling. What you're saying also touches on the fact that the law, as it is, provides for GCOM to take actions for the removal of difficulties.
Yes.
And it's under that law that GCOM came up with Order 60.
Yes.
That provided for the recount, which in itself is not in the law. The recount we had is not provided for in the law.
Right.
We have a normal recount provided for immediately after the elections within 48 hours, blah, blah, blah. It is not as extensive and of the magnitude that Order 60 recount was. But Order 60 recount, it was made possible under provision of the law which says GCOM can do things for the removal of difficulty. And the difficulty which we were faced with is the contestation that was taking place over the declaration in District 4. And let me emphasize that because there's people who talk about all sorts of declarations. There was never a declaration by GCOM that can be questioned. There was a declaration in District 4 that was being questioned. GCOM itself never made a declaration. And in fact, when the chief elections officer gave an interpretation to one of the rulings of the court which says only valid votes should be counted, and therefore eliminated the votes on the East Coast, eliminated those votes, we had a situation where that report was not accepted by the commission. The commission said, go back and count all of the votes because your interpretation may be wrong. And I think by then there was an appeal ruling of the court. So the question of valid votes became a moot question at that time. And the chairman ruled that the CEO should go back and count all of the ballots, irrespective of the difficulties that have arisen. And in that regard, I want to remind this nation of my own disposition, because there are those trawlers and haters who like to tell this nation about some result that was a rigged result that Jacques Diot said I'm the author of. But my position in the commission is documented and can be found if they haven't mischievously dealt with it in the library and the university's library. And what I said then differed from what Lowenfield had proposed, though he had reason for what he had proposed. I said, look, you cannot invalidate and nullify without remedy all of the votes on the East Coast. Because the fact of the matter is that there were persons who voted, we saw people voting, and therefore they must be, even if there was mischief, they must be valid votes. And so in that regard, my proposition was that you could nullify those votes because of the contamination that may have occurred. But to ensure that there wasn't disenfranchisement of the valid votes among the contaminated, there should be a by-election that allowed for the East Coast to have a second round and to bring those results, which would hopefully have been better scrutinized, the process better scrutinized and so, and add them to the results which were not being contested. And those were the pre-East Coast results, which were not being contested, to add the contested ones coming out of a by-election to the uncontested ones, and to use that as the basis to give a result that was not going to be faced with contestation, as it turned out to be, given the various petitions which were brought after the 2020 elections. This, I'm not seeing the moderator on screen, so they may be.
I took myself off the screen to give you the full floor. Althea is asking if you kept a copy of that proposal for a by-election, and I was saying to her that you just waved the copy to us, so clearly you have your copy. A copy is supposed to be at UG Library and the National Library. But yes, Ms. Alexander does have a copy, Althea. And perhaps, Vincent, we could make arrangement for you to have a copy.
The document is important. Please, anybody can call at my office, and I am prepared, free of cost. I'm prepared to give anyone free of cost a copy. The document is referred to as the General and Regional Elections 2020, the case for a non-declaration.
Right.
The case for non-declaration.
The case for non-declaration. I will ask Mr. Alexander to make available a copy to me that I can also make available to interested parties on this program. In case you're just joining us, we are talking election, and we have to continue talking election. One of the things about Thief Man, he don't like see Matty with bag. You don't like see Matty with bag. Thief Man like to get a clear path, right? And we are going to day in, day out block every area. Now, Vincent, let me ask you this question before we move on to the voters list. When Jack Dio was confronted with his own argument in 2016 and how he now has changed, his answer was that the things that they advocated for in 2016 have been taken care of by GCOM. Please respond to that.
Two things. GCOM itself did not do a review of the 2020 elections and really made no constructive contribution to the reform process the government said they undertook. That is one. Secondly, the reform process, in my humble opinion, was a sham. I attended a so-called consultation at the convention center. If the consultation took 2 hours, the government people spoke for 1.5 of those 2 hours. And the floor would have spoken for 30 minutes. I raised a contention and asked for an opportunity to speak a second time, and it was refused. And so for all intents and purposes, what they call a consultation was really a presentation on what they intended to do. And the extent to which what they intended to do came from their disposition of things, rather than an objective and nonpartisan review of what occurred, did not provide for the legislative things that they've done to be representative of really the flaws and gaps that need to be addressed. Much of what they did is imposing penalties on people for wrongdoing. That is much of what they did. So they're saying, all right, we accept that the human factor could be an issue. So that is an acceptance that they haven't voiced otherwise. Could be an issue. And therefore, as a deterrent, we are going to put in place penalties that would deter people from doing things, so that really that is an acceptance that up to 2020, the human factor could have done things. And they're saying that could have, did do things. But yet their argument now is that the system was perfect, there were no problems, there's only a man named Mingu was a problem. And other people who they charged afterwards. But the fact that they have put penalties in there is an implicit acceptance of the issues with the human factor. Now, that, however, has negatives. Negative being that the way in which they put penalties, you don't have to do anything intentionally. They've created crimes which, from a legal standpoint, do not require both elements of a crime. In law, for one to be convicted of committing a crime, they have to have two elements. The act has to be done, but you also have to establish that the person had an intention. So the act was not just, it just didn't happen out of ignorance. There was the intention. What they have done with these offenses in GCOM is once the act is done, even if it's out of misinformation, out of ignorance or whatever, once it's done, then there are heavy fines to be paid. And what that means is that people have decided in a system where we have problems with manpower, the quality of manpower, they have put mechanisms that will cause some people not to come forward to work with GCOM because they don't want to expose themselves to being punished if for a chance they made a mistake that had no intent to go against what the system provided for. So that has to be taken into consideration as well. And the whole question of the law, again, as I said, that's really outside of GCOM domain in the instance where it may be relevant. But I am not convinced that it's altogether relevant and that there are mechanisms that can be put in place that will deal with the issues they have thrown up. But the fact that they have thrown these up and are holding on to these, as that man last night did, claiming he was expressing his own view, as a reason why we shouldn't have biometrics now. It's a clear intention, a clear indication that there is not a commitment to biometrics. And that what Jack Dio says, no, is really a dance. Because what did Jack Dio say? He said, I don't have a problem with biometrics. Once it doesn't blah, blah, blah. And however, I will leave it to GCOM to make the determination. Now, who is GCOM? GCOM are three commissioners who are instructed by the PPP and who have no pretense to not being representatives of the PPP. Not nominees, representatives, and that has meaning. And they have no pretense. And they deem everybody as a representative. And so he is saying, leave it to GCOM, where he has his
built-in majority.
And consequentially, leave it to him.
Yes.
Because his representatives will represent his view. And we have a situation in GCOM where after 2020, if there has to be a consensus on a matter, every contentious matter, the chairperson, 90-something percent, probably 99 point something percent, has voted with the PPP commissioners who make it very clear from Bibi Shadiq to now that they are representatives. I try to argue that I am a nominee of the leader of the opposition, and therefore I'm not bound by the views of the opposition. Now that may be a subjective argument, but at minimum, at minimum, I recognize what the Constitution really provided for, and
Right.
seek to present to the public myself in that light. They don't even have the humility to present themselves to the public in that light. They continue to deem themselves as representatives and try to deem others likewise.
Vincent, that's a very important point. It may sound as though it's subjective, but I can tell you, in our party, where one of our members is a commissioner, we have never, and I say this as plain as day. We have never instructed our commissioner what to do. We take report, the commissioner would report to the executive what's happening, the issues there. We may ask for clarification, but our objective is always to our commissioner. Whatever position you take, it must be in keeping with the interest of your job as a commissioner and not your party's view. If we have a view as a party on what's going on at GCOM, we will express that view independent of you. But when you are sitting there as a commissioner, you're not a politician. You are a commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, and you're not going there to represent the WPA's agenda. We expect you will conduct yourself. And from my interaction with the opposition nominated commissioners, you are not being instructed by the political parties on those issues. So I just want to, as someone who you all may consider an insider, to say that that is the approach we take, which I think is different from the approach that the PPP commissioners, nominated commissioners take, and that is that they take instructions from the party. And you can see when my friend Rohi, who's the right man for that side, when he writes and he speaks on these issues, they coincide with what Jacques Dior is saying at his press conference. So one should not take lightly what you're saying, because it points to a difference in approach, in principle, that makes the commission work. Because it's a partisan commission as far as nominees are concerned. But it doesn't have to be partisan in terms of the actual decision-making and the functioning. And I want to say that at least on the opposition side, from what I have observed, at least there is a line that is drawn between the commissioners on the one hand and their job as commissioners and the parties of the opposition. I just want to make that point.
David, let me buttress your point.
Yes.
One, every effort is made by the PPP as a PNC person.
Mm-hmm.
They go so far as, and Anindan did that recently, to say I'm a member of the executive of the PNC.
Yes.
So they make an effort to project you in a particular way.
Yes.
You know, and it's public knowledge, that I have not been a PNC member since 2007. That's one. Secondly, it's also public knowledge that there was an occasion when the leader of the PNC publicly asked for me to resign from GCOM.
Yes, I remember that.
And he couldn't have been asking me to resign from GCOM if I was simply taking
taking instructions from him.
That would have been honky-dory. He asked for me to resign from GCOM. That's public knowledge as well, because he said it publicly.
Yes.
And thirdly, and I'm going to say this one guardedly, there may have been an occasion when, as opposition commissioners, we might have been asked by the now opposition to take a certain course of action, which I will not mention,
right,
which you may be aware of.
Yes,
And
I
we
am.
did not take that course of action.
I am well aware of that.
We have demonstrated that we address our minds to issues and take positions in our deliberate judgment. And we have no apologies if by any chance our deliberate judgment is coincidental with the views of the opposition. Suffice to say that we can give examples of when that coincidence did not occur.
When that coincidence did not occur. Good evening to all of you who are joining us tonight, and you've come out in your numbers. And I dare say that this kind of information is so pivotal to understand our electoral process. Electoral processes around the world are sometimes very difficult. You know, I work in the United States of America, and I have never, in all my decades of teaching at the university level, I've never left the classroom convinced that I have convinced my students about the electoral college, meaning that I always leave the classroom feeling that I have not explained the electoral college in the United States of America, or that my students have gotten the electoral college, because political systems, electoral systems, can sometimes be very complex. And we in Guyana, our electoral process falls under that category of complexity. Because you are creating a system assuming that there is the human factor, as Vincent Alexander says. And so you do everything to nullify the human factor, not do everything to encourage the human factor. And what the PPP is, they've demonstrated yesterday, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, 3 years ago, they were arguing for the very thing that they're now arguing against. What the opposition is calling for is what the PPP was calling for only recently. And one can only explain this resistance, this stout resistance against putting things in place that they have advocated for all of their political life the last 60 years. The last 60 years. That is that they feel the human factor is on their side, or they want to leave enough room for the human factor to kick in. And so that is why that human factor is so important. And that is why, as citizens, we have to educate ourselves on the systems that are being used in our name. Vincent, let's move to the voters list, because I suppose you will get a chance to speak there about the human factor. And I want to begin with legislation. The court has made it very clear that you can't take people's name off the list because you can't disenfranchise them. The voters list arises out of the National Register, and to take people's name off is that you are disenfranchising them. The court has made that ruling. What needs to be done to get a clean voters list? What needs to be done legislatively? Do we need to amend the Constitution, or do we need to go to Parliament and pass necessary statutes? And I'm not talking to you here now as GCOM Commissioner, but as someone who I consider to be very versed in the law.
It would be apparent, David, that to get over the hurdle of the ruling of the judge, that there may be need for constitutional amendment. To get over the hurdle in the sense that you're going to go and remove the law that presently says you cannot do registration from ground zero, and you can't over time cancel a list and introduce a new one. Bearing in mind, David, that prior to that ruling, we had done that. In 2008, we did a registration process that created a new list.
Mm-hmm.
We had agreed in principle that that's the way we will continue over a 5 to 7 year period to bring a new list into existence. The Parliament in 2019 provided the funds for that exercise to be undertaken with the consensus of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It is only after the no confidence motion that we had different antics, and they went to court and got this ruling that you can't take names off of the list. I'm not going to question the ruling. I have my own views about the ruling, but that is where the ruling has placed us.
Mm-hmm.
That we can only take names off the list of people who are proven to be dead.
Right.
Now, my disposition is that what we really want is to prevent people who are not entitled to vote to be voted, people who are not entitled to vote to be voted for. In other
Right.
words, dead people mustn't have somebody cast a vote for them, and people who are overseas mustn't have somebody cast a vote for them, and somebody who got 2 ID cards by any chance mustn't go and cast 2 votes. That is the objective. And so I do not repeat this thing about a clean list. What I say is that you have to have mechanisms that will ensure that you don't have illegitimate votes being cast. And therefore, even in the face of the judgment, in my humble opinion, one could achieve the objective of a new registration by the introduction of biometrics. Because what it would do is rather than stop a perpetration at the point of the compilation of the list, it will stop the perpetration at the point of the casting of the vote.
Of the
But
vote.
the
Yeah.
result would be the same. The result would be the same. Of course, a completely new list is perfect and much better. But if you were to have biometrics, where you can ensure that nobody comes and casts a vote because they are identified as being someone other than the person entitled, then you achieve the same objective of a new list. In that regard, we also have a problem with dead people on the list. And in Guyana, we do have a system where the reported deaths are taken off of the list. But we still know that there are people who named in the list. Guyanese dead.
Right. Guyanese dead. Yes.
We
Yes.
know that. We have the evidence. We had the Chung case. We had the Viola Burnham case. We had the I think it was Aston Chase's wife,
Yes.
or Robeson Ben's father. So we have the cases. So I ain't talking Nancy's story.
And
We
these
have
were
the cases.
prominent people.
And these were prominent people. So we also know that there are thousands of Guyanese between 2008 and 2024, 16 years,
Mm-hmm.
who have died overseas and whose names are on the list. Notwithstanding the very, I can't know how to describe the question. Commissioner tell me that I can't argue that case unless I produce evidence of a dead person. It's the way they deal with claims and objections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if somebody relative come forward and say, my father died in America. Say, no, you can't tell us your father dead. Bring the death certificate. So that person's can't swear to an affidavit to have their name taken off. But somebody can swear to an affidavit to vote.
Right.
You
And
see the
then
balance of things?
by that same logic, now everybody putting up that announcement on Facebook. When I go on Facebook now, the first thing I see is that announcement from people all over the world, especially
Right.
the United States. So that cannot be used to to take somebody's name off?
No. At this point in time, no, it can't be used. So what we are saying is that in addition to the argument for biometrics, there is a suite of things. And one of those is, how do we proceed to take off the names of the known overseas dead? And whilst I will not go into the details, I will say it is doable. It is doable. All we have to do is to commit ourselves to doing it. And once we commit ourselves, it is doable. And that will also address this question of the cleanliness of the list. If we find a way, and I'm saying there is a way, in which the overseas dead could be taken off of the list. Now, there are those who will come back with this whimsical argument that the system is perfect, and therefore all of these things I'm talking about are not needed. The system is perfect. Well, the first argument, the first response to that is this, that the PPP's petition in 2015, which is a document they've submitted, said the system is not perfect. So I don't know who can say it's perfect now. That's the first argument.
CARICOM
Secondly,
said it's not perfect.
All the observers said it's not perfect. And I'm not worried with the observers. Secondly, their legislative changes, which seeks to punish people, is an admission that the human factor could negate the perfect system. So they have presented two sets of evidence of an imperfect system, even as they now say the system is perfect. The petition, the legislation they've introduced, and the comments and advocacy of Barry Jagdeo after the 2015 elections. My contention is that the system is not perfect. And this is not mere conjecture. The fact that at Eccles in 2011, there was a returning officer, a presiding officer, who sought to allow someone to vote who was not entitled to that second vote, shows that the human factor can interfere with the perfection of the system. This is not conjecture. It happened. It happened. The imperfection is built around the human factor. So, for example, the human factor in 2011 again, Boudou's last election. I think it was 2011, his last election. We sat in GCOM and took a decision that persons who were polling agents for the political parties, if they were working outside of the place where they were entitled to vote, they could not get a certificate of employment and vote in that place. Though GCOM staff could get a certificate of employment, vote where they're working, so they don't have to leave their post to go to the place of residence. We took that decision. When they were discussing the matter, we instructed the chief elections officer not to issue certificates of employment to political party workers. And lo and behold, on election day, at the Alexander Village Nursery School, I was able to identify PPP polling agents who were casting their votes there, though they did not reside in that area. And they were doing so because they had been given certificates of employment. The human factor eroded the system and gave them these certificates. And I subsequently found out that they had done similarly in the tens in Linden.
In Linden.
So
and so what happens with the certificate that was given to them to vote in their place of residence.
Well, in some instances, no, they were given certificates to vote in the place of work
Yes.
rather than in the place of residence.
Place of residence. Okay.
Now,
Sorry.
once they had voted, you can't retract the vote.
You cannot retract that vote.
You can't retract it because the vote is not identifiable. The vote is not an analog vote where you say, when we count in the votes, we identify who the voters are.
Right.
The vote is not identifiable. So once they're able to vote, then there's little you could do to pull back that vote. That vote goes through. And so votes went through in 2011 of that sort. Now, having said that, what occurred in 2020, the recount, has provided us with evidence that the system does not necessarily work perfectly. Because we have a situation in 2020 where the APNU AFC made allegations. And my language must be carefully listened to. Allegations. So I'm not saying what the APNU AFC said was right. It's an allegation. The chairperson took those allegations and wrote to the chief immigration officer, who is the commissioner of police, asking for verification as to whether those persons who were alleged to be out of the country were indeed out of the country. In one set of those documents, totaling 207 allegations, we got the return. GCOM got the return which says, yes, 172, based on the records of the chief immigration officer, were out of the country, and they could not verify that 35 were out. So that the allegations then start again a different life, a life of verification by virtue of the process undertaken by the chief immigration officer. Now, I want to make some comments about that. They are now besmirching the name of the chief immigration officer and say, you can't rely on what he said. This man was the legal person given the authority in the same way which Hickens now has the authority to do this job. But more than that, he did not do this job himself. It is the deputy chief. In his response, he specified that the deputy chief had done the job. He merely was the conduit. So even if you discredit him, are they now discrediting the deputy chief as well? Of course, there's no basis to discredit him. You can't identify a wrongdoing that he did in this regard. But even if you're, not confident, so you're saying, I don't trust this man. It is not he who did that. And so we have this situation where we received the response and it was put into cold storage. And then we have the GCOM people, the CARICOM people, coming up in a report that is now everybody's gospel. That says on page 6, the existence of any registered justification, registered, let me say it again, the existence of any registered justification for persons voting outside the region or polling district, right? Let me go that too. Outside of the counting of the ballots, the workstation staff consistently look for any anomalies, such as the existence of any registered justification for persons voting outside their region or polling district. So they were looking for that. Much was made of so-called migrant voters and phantom voters, but no proof was offered as to the ineligibility of persons who voted. This is CARICOM. Now, this report is dated 13th of June 2020. The first return we get from the Chief Immigration Officer is dated the 27th of May. So GCOM had in its possession, on the 27th of May, a document verifying certain things. But yet, the GCOM people are saying much was made of so-called migrant voters and phantom voters, but no proof was offered to the eligibility of persons who voted. And I can only conclude that they said that because the pertinent information was not given to them. And I can go beyond concluding now, because in today's meeting, the chairman said, yes, I didn't give them. And she said she didn't give them because they were not there they were there to observe the count. And this is a matter outside the strict count. And my response to her was that if they were there for that, then why did they write what they wrote in the report?
Right.
Why did they write what they wrote in the report? And the extent to which they wrote what they wrote in the report is an indication that they were minding that business. But you did not make available to them information in relation to that business which they were mining, although you say they should not have been mining that business. And this is one of the documents the PPP waving to say that we can't rely on what James said because the observers said. But the observers, by virtue of the lines I've given you and what the chairman has now said, were not privy to this information and therefore wrote what they knew about. Wrote what they knew about. And what we have found in the case of GCOM, whether you like the Commissioner of Police or not, was that the extent to which there could be suspicion, I'm withdrawing till the suspicion, that things may have gone wrong, is the extent to which you could have reviewed your system so that you could verify whether there are issues that need to be addressed. GCOM refused to verify its system, and the chairman's contention is that these reports of the Commissioner of Police are only pertinent in a petition. And I'm saying that I am not raising the question of petition. That's for the political parties. I'm saying that the extent to which these, at minimum, provides the grounds for suspicion is the extent to which the organization should do an evaluation of the election to determine whether these things have some bearing and therefore the system needs to be tweaked to stop these things from happening. So the chairman is saying, no, we didn't have to do a review because those things are for a petition. And I have argued more than once that the issue is not a petition. The issue is an administrative issue. For GCOM to have done what is normal, even without these documents, an election requires an evaluation. Any project requires an evaluation. GCOM has done in the past evaluations. GCOM has refused in this instance to do an evaluation. And in that context, it becomes circumstantial that people have an interest in not doing an evaluation. And that interest could only be that it will expose what they have been up to. What they have been up to. And nobody can come up with an argument against what I'm saying, because I'm saying at minimum this can lead to suspicion, and of necessity a review should be done of an election, And that review would have helped us to understand what may have occurred. And in that context of circumstantial evidence, it's interesting to note that the Attorney General went to great effort to collect from GCOM not only the documents which had been sent and verified, but all of the allegations, and told this nation that he's collecting them because he's going to use them to prove the wickedness of the APNU AFC. That they concocted these people's names. People were in the country, they concocted it to try to find fault with the election results. And he's going to prove them wrong. And he has the mechanism to do so. He has access to the Commissioner of Police, in whom the President and Vice President have expressed confidence. They've expressed confidence. They said James no good. Hickens good. But they have not come forward after 2 years with a report from Hickens on those documents that would damn the AFT, APNU, if they are to be damned, but would also damn others if they are to be damned. And therefore, that is also circumstantially an indication of an interest in this matter and an interest in non-disclosure, similar to the manner in which, in the early stages, there was a disclosure by James, and that GCOM refuses to see this matter as the basis for them to introspect and interrogate. And the chairman seeks to excuse that decision on the grounds that these are documents for our petition. Also comes into that arena of circumstances. Because in today's GCOM meeting, the chairman apparently listened to Freddie Kissoon and went to GCOM and said, look, I am not contesting factually what I is in the situation.
Vincent Alexander.
Rather than matters,
yeah.
These are matters for petition rather than matters for internal examination. And I'm saying she's patently wrong. And therefore, this whole question of who are circumstantially involved in not allowing us to make certain determinations have shown their hands.
I've shown their hands. Vincent Alexander. Vincent, as usual, you have brought so much information on this matter. I think you've clarified for us a number of issues. This is an ongoing issue, and we are going to engage you as regularly as is possible. The next coming weeks are going to be critical, and so we will reach out to you as often as we can to bring us up to date with what is going on. Thank you very much again, Vincent.
You're most welcome.
And to you, the audience, thank you for staying with us throughout this program and really soaking up this information. I noticed you all last night, you all go from Politics 101 to advancing the cause. And you all were double dipping. Well, I was on both program. I understand that. All right. Tomorrow night, Friday night, we're going to come back. We're going to be discussing this issue and other issues with our usual guests. Thank you all so much again for another program of Politics 101.